You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Ready. I did have a relapse.
What happened during your relapse?
I don't remember.
Oh. Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan. I'm here with Mr. Brett Newcomb.
You're doing that to me again, aren't you?
Well, you walked into that. You knew.
I didn't know, but I had assumptions, and you know what they say about assumptions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had anticipated that because we had discussed it, that we were going live.
I forgot.
And you, I think, deliberately...
I forgot. Let's talk about memory.
Okay.
People forget things sometimes. And the older you get, the more you forget.
People say that. Do you think that's true?
Well, it's certainly true for me. I'm not nearly as adept. I mean, my whole memory process has changed as I've gotten older.
Uh-huh.
When I was younger, I'm old enough, I don't know if the audience is, to remember a Rolodex machine sitting on somebody's desk.
Yeah.
And you go in and say, well, you have his address or his phone number, and they'd whir this little device and it'd spin cards around and stop on somebody's name and say, here. My memory used to work like that. If you asked me a fact question, if I had that fact anywhere in my head, it would just go click. And I didn't have to think about it. I didn't have to ask myself, where did I file that? What's that related to? But as I have gotten older, the Rolodex is broken. Mm-hmm. And now if I need to recover memory that's not readily available, I have to track down, I have to think about where would I have filed it? What would that be under in my file box? Mm-hmm. And can I, like, okay, I'm talking about English history, the history of English kings and queens. At one time, I could name all of the English kings and queens in order, just like I used to be able to name all the presidents in order. Mm-hmm. But now, if you ask me a question, who was the 15th president of the United States, I have to go to a marker point and go backwards or forwards to try to figure that out. Mm-hmm. But I didn't used to have to do that, just would know it. Mm-hmm. So as I've gotten older, my memory has changed, I think, for the worse.
Mm-hmm. And you know that I love the biology of stuff. I would argue that the reason for that is really more related to sleep and quality of sleep than it is anything else.
That's an interesting thought.
So when you sleep, the glial cells, which are the structural cells of your brain, shrink. Uh-huh. And then the ventricles, which are the hollow spaces in your brain, they're filled with cerebral spinal fluid.
Yeah, and all the crappy thoughts you've had all day.
The cerebral spinal fluid flows out across your brain, and it's actually an enzyme that breaks down neurotoxins that actually affect...
Flushes your brain.
Yeah, and it cleans it. Yeah. And so for people who...
So I don't have a clean brain.
Well, you're obviously going to build up neurotoxins and necrotic tissue. I don't know if it's necrotic, it's not dead, but you're going to decrease in efficiency the older you get. We know that when you control for time, IQ remains constant across the lifespan, meaning that when you were 17, you could do an algebraic equation faster than you can do it at 70. But at 70, you can probably do more complex math than you could at 17, even if it takes you longer. Do you understand that?
So
if you control for time, I
don't have trouble understanding. I have trouble remembering.
But then what I wonder is, do you expect yourself to remember in the same time frame?
Yeah.
So it used to.
Because if I'm playing Jeopardy now, I'm not on the front line.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it isn't necessarily that your memory has degraded. It's that the amount of time it takes to recall the information may take longer.
Because it's piled higher and deeper, doctor.
But that exactly could be right, though.
Yeah, I got so much crap in there now. I got to find where I put it.
Right.
It's like sock drawer.
But I really want to reinforce the idea because our population is aging. And we used to have... And
I was thinking this morning on the way out here, because we live in the St. Louis area, and it's raining like heck today. They should not allow people my age or older than me to drive during rush hour when it's raining. Because nobody in Missouri knows how to drive when there's a raindrop in the sky. Mm-hmm. And I got behind all these old people, as old or older than I, which I freely put myself in that category. But I'm an entitled group. I should be able to drive. The rest of them need to stay home.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
God, they can barely see through because they shrink, when they get old. Through the steering wheel. The light changes, they have to think. Used to the light would change and you just start driving. Now they have to think, the light changed, what color is that? Oh, that's green. Oh, take your foot off the brake. Oh, put your foot on the accelerator. Don't push hard. And you're sitting behind them, you would have already be up to 30 miles an hour going on if they weren't in the way. So, yeah.
And I think that is exactly a perfect way of analogizing the situation. And so the question
God, I love when you
is,
talk like that.
can we recognize, we have a young...
We can have an old driver's
bias.
lane. Yeah.
No. We have a young bias in our society and always have.
Oh, yeah.
We idealize
And yet 90%
youth.
of our leaders are 75 or older.
Exactly.
Hello.
And I've always said that the difference between intelligence and wisdom is age.
Have you said that?
I've said it many times.
I don't remember that you've said that. My
That's
memory
because
is going, yeah.
But if you sat with it for a moment, I think that you probably would remember.
Percolate through the stuff, yeah. Perhaps.
So I would really like for us to be able to come to a different understanding that older people may not only have memories that are just as good as their younger counterparts, they actually may have a greater fund of knowledge. It may take them longer to access it, and that's okay.
Well, but knowledge and memory are two different things.
That's true, yes, I agree.
And it's fairly common to recognize that older people may have extremely clear long-term memories. I remember my 13th birthday party, and I can tell you who was there and what I got and blah, blah, blah. But I can't remember why I went in the kitchen today. That's not uncommon. And as you get into that terminal decline, those last 5 years, it becomes more of an indulgence for you, or for others about you, to sit and listen to your stories from your wasted youth, because you can't necessarily remember their name or your dog's name, or
Right, and so I've known you for a couple years,
at least, yeah.
And
I forget how many.
And we have spent many hours on the road together,
yeah.
And some of that time has been spent in various states of traveling to Colorado to go snow skiing.
Yeah.
And there have been times when there's been inclement weather. And one of the things that you have always prided yourself on, and that I have actually taken great solace in, is your ability to drive.
There you go.
When the weather was bad.
Yeah.
And there have been times when we've been in my Jeep and the weather's been bad, and I said, hey, Brett, would you want to drive? Because I trust you better in those conditions than I trust me. Do you still feel that way?
I think so.
Okay. Because I do. I mean, I haven't seen anything that would indicate
my wife and I
to me.
still take driving trips, long driving trips,
Yeah.
which I love. And I'm 74. And I prefer to drive, and I think I drive reasonably well. My oldest son doesn't think I drive well at all, but that's another
Yeah,
conversation.
absolutely.
But what I've found is I don't have the stamina. I won't drive 13, 15 hours nonstop.
Thank God.
But I'll drive 5 or 6 and then stop. And for that 5 or 6, I think I'm still, I'm not as good as I once was, but I'm as good once.
As you ever were.
Right, there you go.
And, actually the stamina piece, I don't even care about, because I never had that stamina. You guys used to drive for literally 18 or 20 hours nonstop, and I would have to endure that.
I
Now
remember
that
when I was young, I'd work all day. We get off. We'll go to a party, leave the party at 10 o'clock at night, drive all night to Florida, get there in the morning, play all day before I go to bed. And it just was not unusual.
I like stopping more.
Yeah.
So,
my kidneys like stopping more now than they once did.
So I'm totally on board with that.
Yeah.
But the way that we got onto this subject was that you had sent me an article, which I think you sent because you thought I would enjoy it.
Well, it was full of all kinds of technical brain
Yeah.
structure garbage.
Yeah. But
it was a an article about the development of childhood memory. And I've always learned, and been taught and taught others, that until you're 4 or 5 years old, you don't have sequenced memories that you can call on. Mm-hmm. You have snapshot memories. Mm-hmm. So you might have a snapshot of your 3-year-old birthday party, or you might have a snapshot of a fight that your parents had that you can remember some piece of that. But you can't remember all the surrounding mm-hmm. detail and color. And then around 4 or 5, you start to remember sequence memories. And then we've done a lot of talk and study in previous podcasts about trauma memories and mm-hmm. the impact of trauma on the development of memories. So this is an interesting topic to mm-hmm. me. You know, I've had a lot of clients come in and struggle with trying to remember things that happened very early in their lives. And some of them just really emotionally invest in a memory that there doesn't seem to be any possible way it could be a physical memory that they would have.
Right.
But there are family myth memories. If you've heard the family story about the time you were 2 years old and you sat in Grandpa's lap and you tugged his beard and made him spill his coffee. If the family has told that about you and mm-hmm. Grandpa as your memory of being with Grandpa in your life when he was still alive, enough times you'll create a memory around mm-hmm. that and be convinced that you remember it, but it's a family myth.
Right.
So how do you separate out those things and know the truth of childhood memories? So what this article was talking about is it has to do with where childhood memories seem to be located in the brain structure. Mm-hmm. And that they seem to be located in the same part of the brain that develops spatial awareness. And so we were talking this morning before we started about things like working 1,000-piece puzzles and soma cubes and making designs. I don't have spatial intelligence. I have mm-hmm. friends that laugh at me about my inability to see things that way. Mm-hmm. I just don't see that.
Could I make a disclaimer, though?
Sure.
You don't have the ability to see the patterns. Yeah. You have spatial intelligence because you have what's called a cognitive map. You have an ability to drive and to understand directions and to understand routes better than anybody I've ever met.
Yeah.
So I would argue you do have spatial intelligence. You don't have the specific kind of intelligence that allows you to see the pattern.
And I would disagree with that.
Okay.
I mean, again, it comes down to definition of terms because
yeah.
I specialize in seeing patterns. I mean, that's what you look for when you do therapy.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yes, I see the distinction.
Okay.
Go ahead.
That's enough.
All right. When we talk about this idea of the infant memory, I would even argue that there's a point at which from birth to 18 months or maybe even a little less than that, when the ability to even create a memory isn't biologically intact in the brain.
So when you study psychology, when you train to be a counselor, you take these classes and they try to teach you about human development. And they talk about a concept called separation individuation. Mm-hmm. And the concept is that the infant child, who is totally his existence is totally at the mercy of others. Mm-hmm. And the primary other, is mom. And when an infant is born, we believe he doesn't know, understand, or recognize mm-hmm. the separateness of himself from his mother. Whenever right. he has a need or an issue, he's wet, he's hungry, he's cold, he's scared, he's happy, he giggles, whatever it is that's going on, mother's there mm-hmm. to participate. Mm-hmm. And when he wants something and makes a demand, mother's there to satisfy it. But as he gets older, he begins to recognize, and if you have had a child, you will recognize what I'm talking about, when they discover their hands mm-hmm. or they discover their feet. They lay in the crib and they discover their feet and they develop purposed control over their feet or their hands. And they can touch, games you play with your kids, like where's your nose, where's your belly button? Because you're teaching him to recognize disparate parts of himself that mm-hmm. are connected. Mm-hmm. So he begins to develop the concept of self mm-hmm. and self being separate from other, mom. And around, 8.5 months, he develops object permanence. And object permanence is if the baby's in a crib in a room that has two doors, and he sees somebody come left to right across the left-hand door, then he looks to the right because he expects them to appear over there. And if they come back and play peekaboo or something, he giggles and he's stunned and it's funny. But he's learning that process. This article says all of that happens in the same zone of the brain where your spatial awareness of the room, the door, the desk, things in the space also are learned about.
Right.
And so that as you mature and evolve, your memory centers move elsewhere in the brain. And so some of those memories from that domain, dominance, may still be there, but they're not readily accessible, and they're not sequenced together in a coherent memory.
Right.
Did I understand the article correctly?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so then when we were talking about that, what I had said is that I think that the point at which we would start to say that spatial awareness in an infant is something that we can track is something called a perceptual cliff, where they put a glass over two tables and they put a ball underneath, and a little baby who has no spatial awareness will just walk out over the chasm and try and grab the ball. The point at which the baby stops and says, oh no, that's a drop off, is the point at which that spatial awareness is really starting to kick in. And according to the article, that's the point at which we would really expect hippocampal memory to start to actually become robust enough that we would call it sequenced. Yeah. And so before that, though, you probably don't have a tremendous amount of memory. And you had alluded to this idea that when we go to psychology school, one of the things that we're taught and really heavily emphasized today is this idea of trauma memory. And so let's take our break, and when we come back, we'll pick that up on the other side.
Okay. One of the reasons that I want to participate in this show is because it gives me an opportunity to clinically review my understanding of what therapy is and how it works, especially for the consumer. So my hope is that we will find conversations that broaden my understanding of that.
And my hope is that we do that in a way that is useful but also entertaining for people, so that they want to listen, not only because they're getting good psychology information, but because they just enjoy the show.
Easy listening with an informational twist. So
that's a new tagline.
They're not sitting there going, huh?
Easy listening with an informational twist.
I'm really good at this. I'm a professional.
You're a professional. If it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. Okay, we're back, and when we're talking about this idea of trauma memory, but we're also talking about this idea of maybe not having this sequential memory at certain ages, it really, for me, brings up this concept that you and I have been very adamant about. You never create a memory.
As a therapist.
Right. And now I'm even wondering if, and I'm going to ask you, how do you feel about this? But I'm wondering if a person were to come and say, "Ooh, I have this memory, and I'm an infant, and Uncle Fred is doing bad things to me."
Right.
Is that a memory that? I mean, I think we should respect everybody's reality. I want to say that up front. But is that a memory that is needed for that person?
In a concrete, objective, external world, I would say no.
Yeah.
In the interior world map for that individual, I would say yes.
Yeah.
And the challenge for the therapist and that individual is to figure out what's the relevance of that. Why are you holding on to that? Why is it bothering you? How is it impacting your relationships or your daily life or what have you? And can we do something about that? I'll give you an example from my own childhood. I remember being in a crib and having the door to the room, a door to the room, kicked open explosively, boom, and frightened and crying. I have been told by the family that my parents had left my brother and I home alone. Nobody knew it, but we were there. I think we lived in a duplex at the time, and we were crying, hungry, wet, whatever. And people realized we were in there alone, and they kicked the connecting door between the duplexes open, and came in and rescued us or got us or whatever. So there's a big, long, elaborate family story about that. Now, I would call that a memory in telling it, because I remember this noise in this door. I can see it. But do I remember what I was taught, what I was told, or do I remember what happened? I don't know. So, fine. How does that become relevant in therapy as a discussion, if it's necessary to have one? Is it necessary to have one? Is that central to issues that I have as a grown-up? I don't know. And that's part of what I need exploration and guidance in therapy about. Let's talk about the relevance of that. Let's talk about how it makes you feel. Let's talk about what emotions come when we approach it. Can you see it? And then what's the payoff? What do you get out of that? Does that protect you from some other more horrible story? Does that cause you to be a certain way? Does that make you less trustful? Are you worried about dependency issues? What could it be? So that's what you do with therapy. You explore those things, not as the expert outside analyst that knows the answer, but helps the client to come to a self-awareness and an understanding of, well, how does that impact me? And can I reframe it? Can I understand it differently?
Right.
Can I package it differently so that we have different outcomes available now as an adult that didn't have before?
And so I would tell you now a story from my history.
Right.
And this is really the context of why I'm asking the question about, does that memory matter? I remember, and I've had a series of therapists, but the gal that I was with for over 20 years, you know who she is, and I think you respect her.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, and
I used to do supervision with her.
Yeah, and so I went to her one day and I said, "Look, I am not happy as a person. I can't figure out why that is, and I am afraid maybe I was sexually abused, and I want to explore that and even explore the option or the possibility that this happened either and I'm repressing it, or it happened and I don't remember it because I was really young." And she said, "I'm not going to do that." And I was like, "Well, why?" And she's like, "If you come to me and say this happened, I will talk to you about it. But what I'm not going to do is lead you to draw a conclusion that might not be real just because you don't feel like you are emotionally where you want to be in life." And I really respected that. But I think there are a lot of therapists who would say, "Oh, like a dog with a bone. Oh, you threw this out there. Yeah, that's absolutely. We got to uncover that because that's a trauma memory, and we got to get to the bottom of that."
Well, but that brings us to one of the more consistent controversies in clinical fields, and that is how important is it, how necessary is it to go back and uncover childhood memories as a regular part of therapy.
Right.
There are many therapists that believe it's critically important. And you have to go back and find every trauma memory that they have and break them down and process them, re-experience them, whatever, let them go. There are other therapists that say, no, we just need to find the one or ones, if they're relevant at all, to the problem. And they may not be problems you're having today in your life, may not be directly relevant to any particular set of memories. Maybe they're relevant to something else.
Right. Exactly.
Maybe your physical condition, maybe your relationship issue. But then it gets into how many angels can dance in the head of the pen thing. It all goes back to this childhood. When you were locked in your bedroom, and maybe it does.
And I wonder if that's not Freud's fault. So Freud was the person who coined the term childhood amnesia, but he saw it as a function of repression.
Yeah.
Right. And so the kid, Freud's idea, and I understand, it was a different time. They didn't have all of the biology that we have. They believed you were born as a fully functional human being. And so that if you didn't have these memories, you must have been actively or unconsciously repressing them. What we know now from biology is you may not have the biological capacity to form these memories for a certain period of time. So I wonder if this idea that we have to go back and find the memories.
If you go back, Freud is interesting because his theoretical work fell into 2 or 3 different domains. Yeah. One of the domains was the one you're describing, but another domain was the whole thing about drives, sexual drive, and that your attachment to your mother didn't just occur because she was your need meter. She met all of your needs and took care of you. She was your primary caregiver. He said your attachment to your mother, in some respects, was a sexual attraction, and your distress with your father, between your father and you, was over sexual competition or sexual tension surrounding access to your mother. So you come up with all these theoretical explanations to say, why do people behave the way they do?
Yeah.
How do we understand personality development? How do we understand individual development? And how do we make sense of all that theory in terms of this person sitting in my office today saying I can't get along with my boss and I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job? And what relevance does all that have to anything? And that's part of what the journey of therapy is then about. It's like peeling an onion. You uncover layers. You solve problems in the order of the importance of the problem. Remembering as a therapist, you're trained the presenting problem, somebody comes to your office, is almost never the underlying problem.
Right.
But you have to start.
I would say never, but you should never
like
say.
To use qualifiers.
I know. I was going to say you should never say something is always. But
you have to start where they are. You have to meet them in the rhythm of the dance, and then explore other dance steps. That's the skill of doing therapy, and the ability to do that without bringing pre-packaged convictions and predetermined assumptions to a conversation with a stranger.
And
agenda therapists bother me.
Yeah, I know. I've known you for a long time, and I was a student before I was your friend. And that's if there's anything that I learned, and obviously I learned a great deal from you, but if there's anything that I learned, it was that if you're doing therapy to satisfy your own agenda, you're doing bad psychotherapy.
You're doing damage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have to walk the line of not implanting a memory, but of recognizing and honoring whatever the reality of the individual is. Do you think that there would ever be a time that you could see yourself saying, okay, you're telling me that this happened in the first 18 months of your life. I'm not sure that I think that a human being can have even episodic memory during that period. So I'm wondering if we could talk about why you feel like that memory is important rather than focus on the memory itself. Do you think that's a fair thing to say?
I wouldn't say the full package that you just gave.
Okay.
I wouldn't say I don't think it's possible for you to have a memory from that time. I would say, let's talk about that. That's a memory you put on the table. Let's explore it. Where did this memory come from? Have you heard this in conversations with others? Did your grandmother tell you? Did somebody tell you this? Do you have feelings associated with it? Can we explore the memory itself physically? Do you hear sounds? Do you see sights? Do you smell smells? Do you have any sensory connection to the memory of which you are aware? And you just start working the piece. That's the thing there. Non-judgmentally and non-provocatively, you start working the piece and trying to stretch that envelope so it comes more fully into the light.
So I think that we are both then in agreement that the memories are not as important as the impact or influence that those have on the person's life, right?
Or the use you make of
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Because Viktor Frankl, who lived through Auschwitz and Dachau, existential psychologist. He has memories of being there the same as other people who were interred, but the way that those affected him was very different.
His philosophy helped him to do that.
Yeah.
But yes, I would agree. I mean, I have some childhood trauma memories that I don't think were horrifying roadblocks, but were aggressive stimulators.
Well, but some people would say
made me determined to do differently or be different.
That the memory that you shared today, the idea of being alone with your brother, hungry and cold in a domicile, whatever it was.
But now I don't remember all of that color.
I understand.
I remember the door exploding open.
Right.
Other people fill in the story.
But you know, there'd be a lot of people who are listening to this that would say, "Oh my gosh, how come Family Services wasn't called? Why were you not taken from them?"
My dad was a police officer.
Why were you
call
not
him on him back in Arkansas in the 1940s? That wouldn't happen.
Yeah, but people would say, "Oh my gosh, that's devastating." And if you were never able to make anything out of yourself because this memory was holding you back, and this trauma reality was something that you couldn't process, that would be understandable. So that is one way of dealing with it. Another way of dealing with it is to try and put it into a context and say, yes, this happened to me, but I still have some responsibility for being able to go out. I think that, and I know I didn't finish that sentence, but I think that one of the things that I sometimes feel like is that we've gotten to the point where we got with substance abuse, where you say if substance abuse is a disease, then you don't have responsibility for it. Yeah. And that's not fair. Yes, you do still have responsibility. You may not have responsibility for the fact that you had the predisposition to be chemically dependent, but you have responsibility about whether or not you do drugs.
That whole not fair thing is also a buzzword for me.
Yeah.
Fair doesn't exist in reality.
So if people have these trauma memories, they still have some responsibility for being able to put that in a context and taking that information and using it to be able to build a life.
I have an incredible urge to eat donuts. Mm-hmm. I have to tell myself or regulate my access to eating donuts as an act of will and responsibility. Mm-hmm. And part of the difference that we differentiate between a child and an adult is that you become an adult not at a given age point, but you become an adult when you are willing and embrace the responsibility of the consequences of your choices. Mm-hmm. So if you want things to be different, then that falls on you. And you can say, oh, if only I had different parents, if I'd been born into a different household. Mm-hmm. If only these bad things hadn't happened. Well, you're here today. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about today and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow.
Right.
Let's don't talk about yesterday.
And I think that that's obviously a topic for a different day, but the idea of locus of control, where do you see the motivating forces of the universe happening? Do they happen outside of you and you're a victim, or do they happen inside of you and you have some ability to control them, right? And I think that a lot of times that's what we're getting at, is this idea that sometimes people have these memories and they experience them as traumas.
They have scripts, and we talk about scripts all the time. I'm not a victim. Things happen to me. Things happen to you. Things happen to everybody.
Yeah.
My choices, my responsibility, my options are determined by my skill sets, my education, my determination, my discipline, and my luck. Mm-hmm. It's random. The universe is random.
And even if you have horrible situations, and we're going to do a show on Viktor Frankl in the very near future, but you know, even if you live in the most chaotic, traumatic situation that ever existed on the face of the planet, you still have the ability to transcend that. Nothing has ever happened to any human being that they can't transcend if they are willing to do the work. Would you agree with that?
Off the top of my head, yes.
Okay. Yeah.
With potential reservations, yes.
And I understand that you can never say ever, but I believe that everybody has the capacity to take their past experience, even if it was really, really traumatic, and be able to still build a meaningful, healthy life.
Well, my hesitation, and I know we're running out of time, but I want to end on this. Okay. I have so much respect for children. I mean, for parents that have handicapped children. Mm-hmm. And the temptation when you have a handicapped child that you love is to make life as easy for them as possible.
Yeah.
But in my experience, with friendships with people that have handicapped children, with families that are working with handicapped children, with school districts that deal with handicaps of all kinds, in my experience, those children who are taught the fact that you have this handicap doesn't excuse you from becoming a responsible human being, mm-hmm. and from learning to mm-hmm. do as much for yourself as you can. Mm-hmm. You don't get a free ride just because you got a bad deal. So you can't be mean to other people. You can't be vicious to other people. You can't get yourself out of control and scream and fall into hysterics every time something doesn't go your way. Mm-hmm. You have to work with what you have. You have to face reality. And I think that's a really important challenge for doing therapy with anybody, handicapped visibly or invisibly, mm-hmm. Emotionally or physically. You have to deal with reality. So let's get to the reality of what's going on with you, mm-hmm. and let's look at your empowerment to deal with that reality.
I like that word, empowerment.
Yeah.
I think people are empowered, and if you don't let yourself recognize your own power, then you're letting someone else take it away from you.
Yeah. Well, I used to work with adolescents all the time who would say, well, I can't go to college. My father won't pay. Mm-hmm. Or if I go to college, I have to become a doctor because that's what my father wants, but I want to be something else.
Yeah.
And I would say to them, you can do it. Mm-hmm. You can do it on your own. You can pay for your own college. It's just harder.
Right.
You have to work nights. You have to go to school part-time and work part-time. You have to take out a loan. But there's another path if you want to find it.
And, and both of us can say that credibly, just like Frankel could say, you are responsible for you. But both of us can say that credibly because nobody gave either one of us a dime to go to school, and we have advanced degrees. So it is possible. And we know that it's possible. And it's possible for anybody. If we could do it, anybody else could do it. But you have to believe in you, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's the bottom line.
You have to have that determination.
All right. Hopefully that was good for everybody. Please check out my new website, michaelmahan.org. The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.